All right, Matt. Well, good to meet you. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making the time. I've been following your content for some time, and we do crossover. We do have a decent audience crossover, believe it or not. In particular, on a lot of the education issues and the culture issues. So I talk about maybe movies and music and stuff like that, but also I've been talking more about literature that's being found in libraries, whether it's just books that don't belong in children's libraries, finding them a way there, whether it's CRT, whether it's the battleground that has become the school board meetings. It's been an interesting year, all thanks to Zoom, I would guess.
Yeah. I think it starts there. I mean, I think parents finally got a look at what's going on in their kids' classrooms and what sort of things their kids are being told, and that was an awakening moment for a lot of parents. I lament the fact that it took so long for parents to wake up to that, but I'm glad that they did.
Yeah, it's a tough balance in trying to finger wag at parents for not being involved. I think that there's a fair amount of criticism in the iPads raising today's kids and things like that. But when I'm watching a lot of this unfold, I'm still kind of overwhelmed with a sense of thank goodness it is happening. It may have been happening for years, but we see this in particular where it's especially touchy is in children's books and things of that nature. We just saw, Sesame Street has always been relatively left leaning and liberal. It's a especially touchy issue, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a parent. I got four kids, so this is something that I'm well aware of. That you really can't take anything for granted in terms of you turn the TV on, you put a kid show on for your kid. You can't assume that what they're going to be exposed to is nothing but kind of harmless kids entertainment, because it seems like everything has an agenda these days, and oftentimes it's pretty explicit. I think with Sesame Street, yeah, I mean, it's always been. You might argue that it's always been somewhat liberal or progressive or whatever, but some of the recent developments, especially things with race. I mean, they've got all these. They made a big deal about unveiling the first Asian Muppet, which is kind of
Mhm.
interesting because we get into the races of Muppets, like what. I mean, what
Yeah,
race is Ernie,
yeah.
or
Racism
Snuffleupagus or
defeated.
whatever?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. But they say, well, we want to teach kids about racism, and because that's the message that a little 4-year-old watching a show about Muppets, like that's what he needs to be told, is that the world's a racist place and needs to be warned about that. So that's the kind of things you encounter.
Yeah, it's frustrating because these kids are basically pure and not racist. When you're young, maybe somebody looks different than you, but this idea that we need to raise our kids into a life of fear and compliance, depending on which side of the victimhood stack you may be on, is pretty disingenuous. I think that over the last year or so, we've even seen Cartoon Network, which was used to be a staple for like, hey, put it on. Now they've got this weird, just a lot. It's interstitched in a lot of their children's programming, but also into their commercial breaks and on their social media. And for a long time, they called a lot of people crazy for pointing out that there was an agenda here. But now it seems very difficult to deny. I would guess.
Yeah, and with the racial stuff, I mean, I think you're right that, especially with how racially diverse the country is right now, most kids growing up, they're exposed to different races and cultures. In fact, the Asian Muppet thing, I saw an interview with the woman who voices the Muppet, and she said that she wants to normalize, Asian people for kids. She wants them to be exposed to Asian people. Of course, you hear that, and you're like, what kid is not familiar with the fact
Yeah.
that Asian people exist? Maybe there was a time in our history when you wouldn't have been familiar with people from other parts of the world. That's not the
Sure.
case anymore. So I think if we just let kids alone and let them hang out with each other and hang out with different kids on the playground and play dodgeball and stuff, they would notice the differences, but they wouldn't think anything of it. I can remember that was the case for me growing up before this
Mhm.
racial stuff was stuffed down our throat. And you notice that other kids are different races, but you don't. It doesn't mean anything to you. It's not a big deal. Now our culture comes around and says, no, this is a really big deal. You need to notice these differences. They're very significant, and they start making some of the kids hate themselves for their color of their skin. Other kids are going to be suspicious of those kids, and so I think it's pretty sinister what's happening.
I've always had a I've not I've always kind of equated it to this Catholicism original sin, like the original sin of whiteness is like baked into a lot of this language, and it's really bizarre. It's like we've abandoned a colorblind society in exchange for this, like we must obsess over the things that make us different rather than coming together on the things that make us the same. And it's really weird seeing in youth media and in children's books and in these cartoons and movies. And you kind of wonder at some point, when are people going to start pushing back?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's an astute comparison. The original sin. I mean, I'm a Catholic myself, so I have noticed that as well. It has a very religious feel to it because leftism is a religion, in my opinion. But the difference between the doctrine of original sin for Christians and this is that, well, for one thing, original sin encompasses everybody. It's not racially based. And for another thing, we as a religious person, I would admit that this is a religious doctrine. I fully accept that, and everything that comes with it. But on the left, they have a lot of really religious kind of spiritual ideas that they try to dress up as secular or even scientific. Gender theory being a big one that they're foisting on kids. This is a very religious kind of idea that, oh boy, you could be a boy and have a girl like trapped in your body somehow. That can't be understood really on any level. But if you're going to try to understand it, you have to approach it from an almost like spiritual, religious perspective. And it still doesn't make sense there, but that's certainly the realm that we're living in when we talk about that.
Yeah, it really fits into the whole, where the gap between science and understanding is faith. Like, you have that where it's like, and the reaction to criticizing some of this stuff is in many cases aggressive, as if you have, insulted their religion or their version of God. And it's very, very difficult to have regular conversations with these people. And, by the time they get to high school, they're inventing all sorts of ways. When I was in high school, there was like the goth kids, or it was like, you had like, a couple of outside, interesting people. Now every kid, in order to feel special, has to have some new, self-ascribed title or sexuality or, connection. These things aren't personalities, in my opinion. Like, but they think it is. That's why when you question it, people get so angry when they react.
Yeah, well, it's identity is the word they use, and of course, when someone feels like they're having their very identity criticized, they tend to take it personally, and then they say they're being erased or whatever. But I think it's similar. You might draw comparisons to when I was a kid, you had goth, you had emo, you had all these different phases and trends and everything. But the difference is that back then, if you were a goth kid, the adults would be kind of dismissive of it. I think rightfully so, and they would tell you that no, this is a phase, this is a trend, you're going to grow out of it. This isn't who you are. These days, though, when kids have their phases, adults are saying something completely different. The adults are saying, this is who you are, this is your identity, this is who you will be forever, it's the most important thing about you. And then it becomes, rather than being a phase, it becomes a full-blown, lifelong identity crisis, and that's what I'm most worried about.
Yeah, and they're signing up their kids for surgeries and medications and things like that. Speaking of kids, so a lot of, I really support this idea over at the Daily Wire and other outlets of kind of creating our own culture, because so long, many of this art, like children's books and cartoons and TV shows and things like that, these have been almost exclusively a left-leaning property, at least nowadays. Maybe it always was. You couldn't know 20 years ago because you couldn't log on to Twitter and see, what the director's personal political opinions are. And Daily Wire's obviously started doing some of this with their individual films, and now you have a book coming out, right?
Yes, I have my very own children's book. Johnny the Walrus is what the book is called,
Okay.
and this is in many ways my answer to the children's books that you find all over. If you go to Barnes and Noble and you go to the children's section, as I said, I got 4 kids, so I buy a lot of children's books, and you go to the children's section in most bookstores now, and it's nothing but left-wing propaganda everywhere you turn. And much of the propaganda, not all of it, there's a lot of racial stuff, but much of it is all about instilling ideas of gender theory, brainwashing kids into gender theory. and telling, books like whatever, the little boy puts on a dress and that means that he's a girl and that sort of thing. So this is my response to that, a parody of it, but something that I think adults will understand and kids will engage with on a different level. And the book is about a little boy, Johnny, who's very imaginative, as all boys are, and he pretends to be different things, and he plays, and it's fun, and it's just a game. And one day he pretends to be a walrus, and he puts like wood spoons in his mouth like tusks, and he wears socks on his hands like flippers. And at first his mom responds to that like any normal parent would and say, oh, he's playing a silly game. But then she goes online and she talks to people and she discovers that, well, no, this is what your child is identifying as. This is his self-identity. And you have to take that very seriously and believe his truth, because that's his truth. And so she tries to raise him as a walrus until at the end I don't want to give away any spoilers.
Yeah,
but
no spoilers.
Right. She at the end maybe she has a little bit of a wake-up call. Now, I expect that this comparison that I'm drawing between a kid pretending to be a walrus and a kid identifying as an opposite gender, I expect that that'll be, upsetting to some people, but I mean, I stand by it 100%. I think it's exactly the same kind of thing. When a 4-year-old boy says, "Mommy, I'm a girl," it's exactly the same kind of thing as him saying, "I'm a walrus" or a dog or Batman. And so this is, I think in this book, it's a message not just for kids but also for adults. Just explaining some basic facts, I guess, about child psychology and how kids work.
Well, and it comes at a good time where I think parents do need some affirmation, when you go there it seems like just a good timing for a book for parents, to just a little reminder that they're not crazy. Because I think that when you're only surrounded with, one particular side of things or one particular argument, you can start to question your own sanity and question, maybe I am the one that's crazy. This book will probably be well received by many people, but also others will probably be annoyed by it. But outrage marketing is also very effective. So is this your first book then, or no?
It's my first children's book. I've got a few, real books with.
This is real.
Well, it is real. It's like physically real. You can see it here.
Yeah.
But I had books that took me more than a day to write. But which isn't to say this is not a high quality story here. I think it is, and I hope people will pick it up.
Where can they pick up the book?
Well, you can get it on dailywire.com. You can also get it on Amazon as of right now. Assuming Amazon doesn't ban it, we'll see about that. But right now, you can get it there.
So Amazon or over at thedailywire.com. Matt, I'm really, really glad. I know you're a very busy man. I'm thankful that you came in. I'm going to pick up a copy. It seems like it'll make a good Christmas gift. I mean, Christmas is right around the corner. People need some books. And I appreciate you. I'm not just whining and complaining like some people do, including myself, but going out and creating something out there for people to consume as a alternative. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining me, and best of luck on your book sales.
Appreciate it. Thank you.